Hello and welcome to Contact. I'm Craig Delahunt, and on today's show we'll be talking with Dr. Patrick Moore, past president and co-founder of Greenpeace. Thanks for joining us, Patrick.
Morning, Craig.
Patrick, before we talk about Greenpeace and fish farming and the Forest Alliance, let's talk about some of the other projects you're involved in right now.
Well, I guess it was 2 years ago now I was appointed to the BC Roundtable on the Environment and the Economy, and that takes up a fair amount of my time. I'm on 3 of the committees of the Roundtable, one dealing with Sustainable Development Strategy, which is the sort of larger committee trying to bring all the elements of BC's economy, environment, and communities together under a single idea of creating a sustainable plan for the province. And that's a pretty big subject, and we're making good progress on it. I'm also on the task force on local roundtables. The BC Roundtable is encouraging the development of local and regional roundtables where you get all the stakeholders together and work by consensus to advise the local and regional governments on such issues as land use and forestry and fisheries and all these matters that are of concern, in order to get a little bit more bottom-up and a little less top-down in our decision-making process in the province. And then I'm also a member of the Roundtable Land Use Group, which is looking specifically at how are we going to develop a land use plan for BC, something that people on all sides of the equation have been calling for a long time. Another initiative I'm involved in, and one that is my own initially, is the BC Carbon Project.
And you're having a seminar, I believe, in May?
Yes, we're having a workshop 24th of May, I believe it is. It's the beginning of the Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday in that week of May. And what we're doing is that the workshop is called the BC Climate Change Workshop. How can BC be part of the solution?
And that's the solution to global warming?
The solution to global warming and the solution to the emissions of greenhouse gases that we're responsible for. I mean, in a way, no matter what BC does, if the rest of the world doesn't change, we can't really solve the problem by ourselves because it's all one atmosphere. But we can make a contribution along with the rest of the world by reducing our own greenhouse gas emissions.
And how can we do that? Does it tie in with forestry or more with urbanization?
Well, this will be the subject of the workshop. Now, there are people coming at it from a lot of angles. Some people say we should grow more trees and that way absorb more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Other people say we should use less gasoline. In other words, use fewer cars, reduce the number of automobiles. I think
Well, I guess it's a little bit of all.
It's a little bit of all, but the transportation issue and the use of fossil fuels in transportation always comes up as the most cost-effective, most likely way to go. I mean, even if it was just through increased fuel consumption regulations, so that we weren't allowed to buy cars unless they got a certain mileage per gallon.
Now, aren't we slowly working towards that? Not with regulations that we can't buy cars, but with the reduction in the size of car engines and...
Well, unfortunately, last year was the first year in a number of years where the fuel efficiency of the North American automotive fleet actually decreased. It got worse. And the reason for that is because right back in 1980, Ronald Reagan took the Carter administration's program, canceled it. That was basically that the U.S. auto fleet would have to improve its mileage by 1% per year. And you'll notice now that Chevrolet and Ford and other companies have come back with full-size sedans. That's because they removed that requirement. And Amory Lovins, the energy expert, says that, for example, that if Reagan had left that requirement in, that the United States would not have to have defended its oil supplies in the Middle East when it went to war against Iraq, that it would no longer be dependent on those if it had allowed that. So there's a whole range of points and arguments around this issue, but what it comes right down to is that it would save us money to reduce our emissions of carbon dioxide from transportation. It might be a little less
Now-
convenient for people who want the headroom and the leg room and all the rest of it. We might end up with a little bit smaller.
Oh, we've already
Cars,
crossed,
etc.
in a way, society's crossed that bridge, I would imagine, with the
Some
smaller
people
cars.
have. Some people have.
But now in LA, aren't there some sweeping new legislated rules coming in about there having to be a certain percentage of electric cars by, I believe it's 1999, somewhere in that?
I think it's actually in either 95 or 97 when it starts to kick in, and a certain percentage of new vehicles have to be non-fossil fuel. And that the move to develop an electric car is now well underway. The Japanese are in the forefront as usual.
So that's a possible solution, maybe.
It's not a solution.
It's a Band-Aid solution, I guess.
The most daunting statistic is the fact that just to stop the increase in greenhouse gases, we would have to reduce our use of fossil fuels, say, by 60% from the present levels on a worldwide basis, when it appears as though it's just going to keep going up, never mind being reduced by 60%. You can just imagine if an order was given in British Columbia to reduce the use of gasoline and heating oil by 60% next year. What do we do? How do you do that?
Exactly, and then also there's a strong lobby by vested interest groups, and I'm thinking of, in England, the coal industry. They've actually put out a video called Global Warming, the Conspiracy, and they present some pretty good facts as to maybe the greenhouse effect will not happen. They're not really sound in their foundations, but how do you feel about that? Do you feel that they're...
I feel that the coal industry, of all the, quote, culprits in the fossil fuel side, have taken the most dishonest approach to this issue of global warming. There is no question that there's a consensus of scientists internationally that we have a problem here and that it may be a major problem. And for the coal people to muddy the waters by making it appear, and they say there's no consensus, they say there's no conclusion, and that there's no evidence, etc., etc. They really try to make it appear as though it's really up in the air. But there's no way that it can legitimately be portrayed as a 50-50 deal. You know, if there's a doubt, it's pretty small at this point.
I would think so. Ozone depletion, the latest figures, possibly 30% over the northern hemisphere this spring.
I was really sad this morning. I read the Globe and Mail headline that the Minister of the Environment has advised us not to let our children in the sun. As of this morning. And that's getting fairly fundamental when the sun starts to be poisonous.
In the wintertime.
In the wintertime, and well, it's going to be year-round. I mean, it looks as though the chlorine levels in the atmosphere are much higher than they had predicted. We know the lag time, even if we stopped producing CFCs tomorrow morning, all the CFCs that are resident in existing cooling, refrigeration, and freezing and automobile systems is a tremendous amount. And much of that is going to find its way into the atmosphere one way or another, unless really drastic measures are taken. I mean, who would ever have thought that refrigeration would be the end of civilization, or whatever it is that might be happening here?
Be an interesting epitaph. There's a lot of people also, even with ozone depletion, stating that really hasn't been proven to be caused by CFCs, even that maybe it's just volcanic or whatever. Let's move on. We've got so many things we talk for weeks, but and our show's only half an hour. But let's talk a little bit about Greenpeace. Why did you feel compelled to become a founder or get involved with an environmental movement that became the biggest and the most influential in the world?
Well, I guess the fact is that the environmental movement and ecological awareness was just really coming to the forefront at that time, 1969, 1970. I, at the time, was enrolled as a PhD student at UBC, studying ecology and working on the case of the Island Copper Mine, which has been operating for 20 years in the north end of Vancouver Island, where I grew up.
Yeah.
But at that time, it had not gone into operation yet and had applied for a permit to dump all its waste in the ocean. And as a PhD student, I entered into a study of the process, of the pollution control administration process, basically to determine whether or not that process was amenable to facts and information. I proved it was immune to the truth in the end.
What was your major conclusion?
The major conclusion was that the company was either not telling the truth or ignorant of the facts, on one hand. On the other hand, that when apprised of the facts, the government agency responsible did not take those facts into consideration. In other words, the pollution control people in the end said, well, really, it's not up to us whether or not this mine goes ahead or not. All it's really up to us is to determine the nature of the manner in which the waste is dumped. So not whether or not the waste is going to be dumped, but just what size pipe is going to be used and things like that. So I sort of proved that the pollution control process was fundamentally flawed and was not really effective in actually preventing pollution from occurring.
What are the results, as far as you're concerned, with the bottom of the sound now?
Well, the inlet has been irreversibly changed. It used to be 600 feet deep, and now it's only 200 or 300 feet deep, and it has a layer of finely
they're
ground.
creating real estate.
Yeah, they've created some waste rock dumps. They've filled in.
So they've destroyed the bottom.
A lot of the bay.
400 feet of silt is going to be hard on the bottom dwellers.
Well, yes, it is. I mean, I don't know if that's the real issue. I mean, the fact of the matter is over time, the earth will heal itself, and the sea will heal itself, and this inlet will be a different shape than it used to be, as if a glacier came and changed it. I don't know if that was the issue, but that's how I got involved, anyways, in the environmental side. And I realized then that there really were not effective mechanisms to consider these things properly. At that time, the opposition to the U.S. nuclear program in the Aleutian Islands was growing, and that's where I came into it during the formation of the Don't Make a Wave Committee.
Which was the original Greenpeace?
The original Greenpeace, and then we chartered a boat, the Phyllis Cormac, which we renamed the Greenpeace. It started off as the Greenpeace, was the nickname of the boat, and eventually we decided to name the organization Greenpeace Foundation, and the rest is history. But so I was a student of ecology. I was very, very much almost born again, having discovered the science of ecology and studied it for many years.
Now, that was important because Amchitka was located on a fault, and the fear was that nuclear blast would trigger an earthquake.
And
one of the
and
fears.
perhaps a tidal wave. That was the derivation of Don't Make a Wave.
As they'd experienced in Port Albernia about 4 or 5 years before. Your second campaign, Whaling, that was a fluke, I think, that you got on it. I think Paul Watson developed appendicitis up in your hometown or near it, and you wound up taking his place. Could you tell us a bit about after that?
Yeah, well, actually, it wasn't so much a fluke in that Bob Hunter and I had been involved in the planning of that campaign from the beginning, and it was part of the plan was for the boat to, both boats actually, we had the Vega operating for us as well, was for both boats to come to
and that's a little 33-foot sailboat, which has done yeoman's work.
And still doing it. So we were based out of Winter Harbor, which was where I was living at the time. And it had always been understood that I was going to end up being part of the crew. I can't remember now exactly where Paul's appendicitis fit in, but I don't think that's terribly significant. Paul and I were both on the voyage when we met the Soviet whalers, so it wasn't a case of one of us bumping the other one. He left the boat for a period of time due to appendicitis, and I think there was some issue of whether he should be allowed to come back on again. Now, at a certain time, due to his health, I can't remember the details, but he ended up on the boat. So Bob and I and Paul and George and Walrus, and we were all on that Phyllis Cormac trip down to the California coast, where we eventually confronted the Soviet whaling fleet.
And I guess to a lot of intents and purposes, you succeeded tremendously in the goals you set yourself. What are some of your feelings about how Greenpeace worked to stop or to really reduce whaling?
Well, in specific cases like whaling, there was, I'd say, virtually total success was achieved. I mean, in an overall sense, Greenpeace has definitely achieved what we set out to achieve, which is to bring worldwide attention to bear on the pressing issues of environment and ecology. That's been done. The attention is gained. The issues have all been joined. There's not really very many issues other than perhaps population, which Greenpeace has not addressed directly and developed some kind of policy on. They're even now moving into the urban issues of transportation in particular because of the climate change problem, and they're focusing on the private automobile and internal combustion engines in particular. So, you know, there's nothing that they haven't addressed. They've won the World Park for Antarctic. They've stopped the dumping of nuclear waste at sea. They've stopped the slaughter of nursing seal pups in their rookeries on the ice. They've stopped, to a large extent, the killing of whales. And now they're working on issues such as CFCs. I see them the other day demonstrating in front of the DuPont factory. I mean, that's Greenpeace at its best. That's classic Greenpeace, bringing attention to the problem.
This is, what's your best memory?
Oh, there's so many of them.
One of your best memories.
Well, one of my most vivid memories is being apprehended by the U.S. Coast Guard in the Straits of Juan de Fuca in our campaign to stop the supertankers from being permitted to ply these inside waters on a regular basis. That was a campaign against the 310,000-ton BT San Diego, and Rex Weiler and I succeeded, with me driving and him filming, in stopping a 300,000-ton boat dead in its tracks with a 14-foot Zodiac inflatable. And they didn't take kindly to that they had to, so-called for our safety, they had to stop this ship. And it demonstrated how difficult it was for them to stop, how long it took for them to stop. It really, the campaign just worked. We had all the media there in helicopters and boats all around the place. And then the Coast Guard overreacted. And the arrest they made of myself and Rex was quite a violent arrest. They basically threw me on the aluminum deck of their boat face down after they'd almost killed us with these little PT commando type speedboats trying to cut us in half or cut us off. Well, we tried to escape from being apprehended. When they did finally catch us, they were annoyed, and they treated us like that.
As such.
And handcuffed us in a very painful fashion, and threw us in jail. As per usual, we didn't have to spend the night because we had good lawyers. But
you were successful?
We were
no
successful.
super tankers?
Very
Again.
successful.
I don't think we're going to have time to talk about fish farming, but let's talk about something else. I think a lot of the environmentalists are wondering if possibly you fall in with bad company and you've lost your way. And I'm referring to the Forest Alliance. Would you like to tell us why you became involved with the Forest Alliance and what its mandate is?
Well, Craig, I occupy unique ground in a certain sense in that I grew up in the forest industry. My family's been in the forest industry since the turn of the century in BC. And my father has been a prominent figure, president of the truck loggers and now president of the Pacific Logging Congress. So I know the industry from the inside, and I know many of the people involved in it. I've also had this long relationship and working life as a career environmentalist. I know all the issues on the environmental side to do with forestry. So in that sense, I am a logical candidate to try to bridge this situation. But there's plenty of people trying to burn that bridge. And the fact is, when you try to get in the middle of an issue like this, they shoot at you from both sides. So when I'm talking to environmentalists, I tend to try to explain some of the difficulties that the companies may be having in meeting some of their concerns. When I'm speaking to people in the forest industry, I tend to try to explain to them what biological diversity means to the environmental movement. You know, and what the various other values are and how they should approach that in a proactive way. So the way I see the Forest Alliance, which has been confused in people's minds because the Forest Alliance is not the industry. They're the people who are funding it. The forest industry is funding the Forest Alliance to a large extent, although it's receiving funding from memberships from the general public and also from some of the other companies that are dependent on the forest industry for their existence. So it is upfront an industry-funded initiative. then the question becomes whether or not it is a, quote, sincere or progressive or proactive or all those, like, positive. Is it a positive initiative?
Now, getting back to whether it's sincere or not, the public, I think, is because of its involvement, or actually the fact that it is a brainchild of Burston Marsteller, that question always pops up, and I know that gets your blood up, but I think
it doesn't get my blood up. What gets my blood up is the fact that the media has tended to focus almost all its attention on who our industry supporters, public relations consultants are, as opposed to who the Forest Alliance is. The Forest Alliance didn't hire Burston Marsteller.
But isn't your executive director, isn't he actually either hired by Burston Marsteller, or isn't he the vice president of Burston Marsteller in town?
No. Before the board...
I'm thinking of Gary Lee.
You're thinking of Gary Lee. He's a consultant. Before the board of the Forest Alliance was created, Gary Lee was asked to assist in the recruitment of that group and to be a staff person supporting that group as they came into being. So the relationship between the forest industry and Burston Marsteller preceded the existence of the Forest Alliance. Now you have a group of people, 31 in all, who have been basically recruited from the community at large.
Now, I guess that's another question, is that it's a community representation, but are there, apart from yourself, any other environmental groups that are represented on the board?
There are no environmental groups represented on the board, in the sense I don't represent an environmental group. And most of the people on the board stand as individuals. They are former mayors,
present mayors,
people who are not there representing any group. They're there because they are independent people, individual people. Now, it's all the people on that board of the Forest Alliance are generally positively disposed to helping the industry deal with its problems. And one of its biggest problems is the environmental agenda. So the Forest Alliance's role is to provide industry with advice on how to achieve some kind of harmony with the environmental agenda, but in an upfront way, not in a, like, they've got their public relations advisors besides, and their own public relations departments, and their own lobby organization, the Council of Forest Industries, if they want to talk quietly to people. But the board of the Forest Alliance is basically an open body that is trying to provide them with real positive advice on how they can meet this challenge proactively or progressively, and the principles of sustainable forestry that we've been working on.
Now, some of these principles, and actually I was just going to, sorry to
are one way of helping them to do that, is to force them into committing themselves to principles that really will result in sustainable forestry.
These principles, in a way, do parallel some of the initiatives the environmentalists would like to see implemented. Would you like to discuss some of them?
Sure.
I'm thinking there's about 18 here. You've got a list in here, and I'm looking at things like a reduction in size of clear cuts, things like that. Would you like to go over some of the initiatives that you're presenting through the Alliance, or the Alliance is presenting?
Well, first, the principles of sustainable forestry don't have any numbers in them, because that becomes a very site-specific issue. You can't just say there will be no clear cut larger than 20 hectares ever allowed again in the province of BC, because it might be that it's very obvious that in a certain place it should be 22 hectares because of the topography and the ecology and everything else to do with the area. So what we've done is we have laid out a set of principles which we believe will, by nature, result in the elimination of these progressive, huge clear cuts. We know they will, because if all of them are complied with, you will have much more of what is called landscape forestry, or forestry that takes consideration of much smaller units of the land, that has a more organic look to it, much more of a mosaic to it, rather than just big swaths cut through no matter which way the topography seems to go.
In keeping with these big swaths, and I'm diverging a bit, but we've got to get a lot in here, but I'm just, do you think that there's any foundation in the Time magazine report, Brazil of the North? Now, I know that's something that...
Well, Brazil of the North, again, it's one of these very catchy phrases, and that's how, unfortunately, forestry is an extremely complex subject. It is much more complex than most other subjects, and to just say Brazil of the North, that's great, but What do they mean? Do they mean that we are slashing and burning our forests and causing deforestation like they are in the Amazon? Because if you go to Brazil and you look at the forest situation there is this situation where the tropical rainforest is being burnt basically for the establishment of farms, small
Ranches.
subsistence farms and ranches. You also have a forest industry in Brazil, which is not in the tropical rainforest, but is rather further into the south. Now that is plantation forestry, and is in fact one of the models of plantation forestry in the world. It's apparently quite a good model of sustainable forestry. So, when it's said Brazil of the north, the image that comes to mind is all these forests going up in flames and being left with a desert behind. That is not valid for British Columbia, because we're not doing that here.
Patrick, we're almost running out of time. What do you think about European boycotts? Prince Philip coming here in March?
I think Prince Philip coming here is a very good move. He is not going to, at least I don't think he's going to, come down heavy on one side or other. He's going to be an influence towards resolution and reason being applied to the situation.
European boycott?
That's what I believe. Well, they say there is no European boycott. Is there or is there not? I think the people who are supporting...
Why I'm saying that is, in a way, that's what stopped the seal kill, so there's a parallel,
Yes.
and you're caught in that parallel.
Well, I'm not caught in it.
No, but I mean, you're a player.
The industry here is very concerned about it, but I really think that if the focus is going to be on pulp and paper, it's very confusing now as to whether the focus is on dioxin and chlorine or whether the focus is on forestry practices. Because all the pulp and paper that BC produces, or almost all of it, is a derivative from logging for saw logs and for lumber. And we're not actually cutting down our forest to produce Kleenex here.
Patrick, I hate to do this. We've got to do this again. We've got a lot more to talk about.
Great.
Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Craig.
For Contact and Anderson's Restaurant, I'm Craig Delahunt. Please join us again next time.